In this video, I'm going to be making this foldable paint booth, which I designed to fit perfectly on top of one of my rolling workbenches, which hooks directly into my shop air filter, which extracts all of the harmful paint fumes out of the paint booth and sends it outside the shop. I'm also going to show you how I built these really cool swivel stands that made it super easy to turn and spray over 200 Pegs and Joker game boards in a very short period of time. If you're interested, stick around. Now, if you're not familiar with my rolling workbench, it's basically a workbench that tucks underneath my miter saw station, and it opens up to access larger tools inside. I'll put a link to that video and a link to the plans in the description of this video. Likewise, if you're not familiar with my shop air cleaner, which doubles as an air extraction unit, I'll put a link to that video as well in the description of this video. Many of you are probably already familiar with the pop-up tent style paint booths that are available, and don't get me wrong, those are great options for small projects. But the issue with those is that unless you're spraying outside, paint fumes still fill up the shop and overspray can still be an issue and get all over things in the shop. I wanted a solution that basically enabled me to store and deploy a paint booth easily, just like these pop-up tent style paint booths, but also had better lighting, extracted all the paint fumes out of the shop, and was custom fit for my workbench so that I can easily spray a lot of parts without bending over. Now, if you think one of those pop-up tents is a better fit for you in your shop, I'll go ahead and put a link to those in the description of this video. I started with a 1/2-inch 4x8 sheet of plywood and broke it down using my circular saw. Then I batched out all of the smaller pieces on the radial arm saw. If you decide to build this paint booth with a single swivel stand, you'll only have a few parts to cut out, but in my particular case, I wanted to build 12 stands so that I could easily spray multiple parts on a single stand, then pull out the entire stand and set it on the floor to dry, while I inserted another stand into the paint booth to spray more parts. For this reason, I had a lot of pieces to batch out. The main support structure of the paint booth and the swivel stands are made of 2x2s, which I ripped down from 2x4s on my bandsaw. 2x4s tend to have lots of knots and twists in them, which like to close in and pinch the blade on my radial arm saw. So for this reason, I chose to rip them down on my bandsaw, which cuts through them like butter. Each swivel stand needed to have enough hooks to hang 10 parts each. So I spaced them apart evenly, and then I used my drill press to drill holes for each of the nails that will be bent into hooks later. So the idea with the swivel stand is that you will have these smaller plywood pieces that have a long 4.5-inch nail through one end that pivots inside of a crossbar, and a smaller nail on the other end that pivots inside of another bar that is used as the main crank handle or crank bar. To make this work, we need to drill a hole for the large nail that goes all the way through one end of each piece, and then flip it around and mark or center punch the other side where we're going to put the smaller nails later. After I had the holes drilled, I used 4.5-inch 30D size nails and hammered them into each piece. The holes that I pre-drilled in the plywood pieces were just large enough so that the nails fit tight and wouldn't spin. The holes that I drilled into the crossbar, on the other hand, were larger so that the nail hooks could pivot inside the bar effortlessly. After I had all the nails inserted into the crossbar, I clamped the assembly to my workbench and used a small diameter pipe to bend and shape each nail into a hook. For the crank bar, I used cheap 1 1/4 inch drywall nails and tapped them into the recesses that I made earlier. I made sure to leave extra room between the nail head and the top of the crossbar so that it would be easier to lift and crank the bar without anything catching and getting hung up. Lift, crank, drop. Lift, crank, drop. After I had all the stands built, I moved on to the air filter box for the paint booth. I used a flat surface to 8-inch diameter takeoff duct, which has a peel and stick adhesive gasket that I stuck to the plywood before cutting the hole. I also used a few short screws to secure it in place. To cut the hole, I flipped everything over and used my router with the flush trim bit. The ball bearing on the end of the bit rides along the inside edge of the duct fitting, making an absolute perfect hole. The air filter box frame is basic 2x4 construction, which I glued and screwed together. Oh, I wasn't supposed to cut that? Since the 2x4s weren't perfectly flat, I used some construction adhesive to ensure an airtight seal. Then I screwed the back panel onto the frame. On the inside of the frame, I added plywood stop strips to prevent the air filter from being sucked all the way into the box. For the main enclosure, I used Coroplast panel, which is basically plastic corrugated sheets that you can find at Home Depot. It's rigid enough to make a good structure, and it lights up nicely when shining an LED shop light through it. After cutting out the panels with a utility knife, I used duct tape to not only seal the seam, but also act as a foldable hinge so that I could easily fold up the booth and store it away when not in use. The Coroplast panel is super easy to cut with a sharp utility knife, so cutting out the opening for the air filter was a piece of cake. For the main enclosure support frame, I added plywood pieces to help support my LED shop light, and these fold away for easier storage. Now that the booth was ready to go, I had to convert my shop air filter to an air extraction unit so that it would vent all of the fumes outside instead of circulating the same air around the shop. This air filter design makes this really easy to do, and it only takes about a minute or so. To attach the booth to the air extractor, I used this 8-inch diameter flexible hose, which hardly takes up any space when it's collapsed all the way. Cool. So I just finished spraying, it was 150 pegs and joker boards. I did quite a bit of spraying through this thing and everything went really well. This is actually my first time spraying. I just got this Semi-Pro 2 Fuji sprayer and this thing worked fantastic. But as I was spraying, I was walking around the room trying to see if I could smell anything, and I really couldn't smell too much. Most of the spray was contained within here and getting pulled through these filters. Through the course of the whole project, I ended up changing these out 3 different times. Once they turned completely white like this, I would just grab another one and swap it out.
As you can see, I started with the blue fiberglass filters, and these things are pretty cheap. I think they're only like $1.50 or something like that. So it's not too bad to swap those out. I would take the filter, because I had two of these. I had one in here and then one up on top. And so I would take the one that's on top and I would swap it out down here and then put a new one up top. I actually have one of those filters here. So this is one that I had sitting up on top. So you can see like some of the spray got through here and made it all the way up to the exhaust vent. This captured most of the remainder of it. When I look at the furnace blower, there's hardly anything on it. There's like just a little, maybe a little dusting on it, but that's about it. These stands that I made were an absolute lifesaver. Oh my gosh. It was so easy to spray one side, turn it, spray the edge, turn it, spray the back side. It made it so easy. It is well worth the extra time to build a few of these stands. Even if you just have one stand, it just worked out really, really well.
If you're interested in building this project, head over to liftbridgefurniture.com where you can download the plans for both the paint booth as well as the swivel stands. And if you're interested in more videos like this one, hit that thumbs up button
and subscribe.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.